How's everybody doing? Good to be learning with you. Let's light up the darkness. Who's in the house on a Thursday? Oh, Shabbos is almost here. Can't come soon enough. Yehud in South Carolina, Stephen in New Hampshire, Paul in the Great Northwest, Bella in Florida, Lucy in Minnesota, Bill in Mid-Missouri, Carla in Brazil, David in Texas, Liz in Central California, Ryan in Jacksonville, Joe in the Inland Empire, Melissa in Great Neck, Al in North Carolina, Sandy in Michigan, Ella says shalom, Marjorie says shalom, Paul in Minneapolis. Welcome, everybody. Our daf today, we're starting about 2/3 of the way down on page 57, but our daf is 58, page Nun Ches. And with that, God willing, we'll finish chapter 2 today here in Tractate Kiddushin, the 20th volume of the Talmud. Of course, the current events are on everybody's mind, and our job is to be learning during this hour. But a couple of things I think bear saying. First of all the learning that we do is helpful, right? It is helpful. The more Torah mitzvahs that are in the world, the more peace there will be in the world. So we're doing our job here during this hour. Secondly, there are reports. You know that I serve in a volunteer armed security force to protect our synagogue and our community here. There are reports, I'm sure you've heard it, it's not particularly exclusive information, that a day of rage has been called for tomorrow, and that may continue into Saturday. So our prayer is that we all be safe. May we all be safe. May all innocent people be safe. But let us increase our vigilance, situational awareness. Don't walk around the street with your eyes in a phone. Don't be doom scrolling the news all day long, but just be aware of your surroundings. Be aware of your surroundings. Just know what's going on. I'm not telling you to stay home, It's our job to go to shul, to go to school, to go to work, to go shopping, to do the things that we need to do. You don't let the enemy terrorize you into living like a turtle in your shell. But maintain awareness. Whenever you're in a place, think about, God forbid something happens, where are my exits? Etc. Right? Situational awareness. Lastly, I'd like to say that totally unrelated to these events, we had to replace one of our automobiles. I think I shared with you last month that we had an accident in the family and nobody was hurt, thank God. But it required us to replace one of the vehicles. So we replaced that vehicle, and it was a used car, and the previous owner had very dark windows in the back, very tinted windows in the back. We're going to change that. It's, some tinting is good, especially in a hot climate like ours, but when it's overdone, it's a safety hazard. But what it made me think about is this, the front windshield of that car is fine. It's the rear that is a problem. Now you might think, well, the car goes forward. 99% of the time we go forward in the car. What difference does it make if it's difficult to see what's behind us, right? What matters is we're going forward. And the answer is that if you don't have clear vision about what's behind you, you're not going to be as safe and you're not going to be as wise moving forward, right? They say that hindsight is 20/20. No, it's not. Hindsight provides great clarity when people examine what's happened in the past, right? The unexamined life is not worth living. It's an American author who said that, right? But the concept is, if you don't reflect over what's happened, you're not going to learn from it, right? Those who do not study history are doomed to repeat it. Same idea. So if you're not having, if you don't turn your eyes, not when you're driving, it's not like you're going to drive like that, but if you're not going to take a good look at what's happening behind you, right? If you can't see clearly in the rearview mirror what's happening behind you, you're going to have problems dealing with what is ahead. I heard today on the news a senior leader of the Israeli army saying, no excuses, no bones about it. What happened here, evil and reprehensible and barbaric as it is by the actors who did it, as in terms of the posture of Israeli security, said this leader, we failed, right? Absolute failure. Failure of intelligence, failure of security posture, failure, etc. And there's only so much we can do right now as we're mobilizing at the speed of light to take care of ourselves going forward. But the investigation by the parties who are free to do that investigation has certainly already begun. And it will continue, and the Israeli army is going to get a tremendous sense of clarity over what happened, what were the failures, so that they're not repeated in the future. And all of us need to learn that as lessons, right? The tinted windows in back, the Israeli army examining itself, as it has always done. There were failures in 1956, there were failures in 1967, there were failures in 1973, there were failures in 1982, and failures at many other points of the way. But what Israeli security and leadership has always been amazing at is learning from the mistakes, right? Learning from the mistakes. And that is not universally true, right? There's many people that will repeat the same mistakes over and over again because they're so wed to a viewpoint and a perspective that limits their ability to look behind them and see what they did and where they were and what to learn from it. So, since we, students of the Talmud, are always seeking to grow in wisdom, let us acquire the wisdom to learn from our errors that are behind us so that we can see more clearly moving forward. Okay. We picked this up 2/3 of the way down on page 57b. We're continuing our discussion of Mishnah number 10. Which held that one who betroths a woman with prohibited items, and is prohibited in such a way that it is prohibited to derive benefit from those items, not only prohibited to consume them, but prohibited to derive any benefit from them, well, having the value, and it takes some monetary value, to use an item as an exchange to create betrothal. So one of the kinds of benefit that are prohibited, when benefit is prohibited from prohibited items, is betrothal, right? So if you use an item that is prohibited for benefit to betroth a woman, there is no betrothal. That's what we've been talking about. And we continue with one of these types of items that are prohibited for benefit. And this is non-sacred animals that for some reason were slaughtered in the temple courtyard when the temple was standing. Which animals were supposed to be slaughtered in the temple courtyard? Animals that were brought there to become offerings. So if not, those are sacred animals. If non-sacred animals were slaughtered there, like as in, for instance, you're bringing the Pesach, right? It's Passover. The temple is standing. We've all gone on a pilgrimage festival up to Jerusalem. And one member of our group, we're all agreed in a little group, we're going to have dinner together. We're going to make the Seder together. One of our group takes our Passover lamb over to the temple to slaughter it there, have some of its blood sprinkled on the altar, and then he's going to bring it back. And we're going to eat from it. But the lamb is too small. So he also brought with him an animal that's going to become a peace offering. And some of it is sprinkled on the altar. I think some of it is consumed by the altar. And the rest of it is going to come back for our meal. And then he thinks to himself, I think between the peace offering and the Pesach, our group is too big and too hungry. We don't have enough food. So while I'm here at the temple, and there's a lot of shechting, a lot of slaughtering going on, these animals that we're going to roast and eat on Passover night. So I've got another animal. It's non-sacred. It maybe had a blemish. It can't be offered, neither as a peace offering nor as a Pesach. But we can eat it, right? It's no problem eating it. So while I'm here slaughtering the other animals, I'll slaughter that too. Can you do that? No way! No way! Non-sacred animals need to be slaughtered outside the temple. So, the Mishna teaches that if a man betroths a woman with the items it enumerated or with non-sacred animals that were slaughtered in the temple courtyard, she is not betrothed. And the Gemara asks, from where are these matters, i.e. that one is prohibited from deriving benefit from a non-sacred animal that was slaughtered in the temple courtyard? From where is this matter derived? Rabbi Yochanan said in the name of Rabbi Meir, the Torah said, slaughter for me, i.e. offerings to God in my place, meaning the temple courtyard, and yours, slaughter for me what is mine, right? Meaning what sacred offerings that at least in part are going to go to the altar. And what is yours, right? Meaning non-sacred things that you're just going to eat, don't slaughter it here in my house, right? In the temple. Right, Rabbi Yochanan said in the name of Rabbi Meir, the Torah said, slaughter for me in my place, and your non-sacred animals that are intended for eating should be slaughtered in your place, outside the temple courtyard. Just as one is prohibited from deriving benefit from my consecrated animals, if they were slaughtered in your place, as one is prohibited from deriving benefit from a consecrated animal that was slaughtered outside the temple, right? A consecrated animal that was slaughtered inside the temple, if it's the type of offering where some of it is consumed by the owner, well, then it becomes permitted to eat that part by the owner. But if you take a sacred animal that's intended to become an offering when the temple is standing, and you slaughter it outside the temple, which you are not permitted to do, now you have rendered it prohibited. You can't benefit from that at all. And just as sacred animals slaughtered outside the temple become prohibited, non-sacred animals slaughtered inside the temple become prohibited. The Gemara asks, if so, just as the act of slaughtering my consecrated animals in your place is punishable by kares, right? Excision, death at the hands of the heavenly court, as opposed to death at the hands of the earthly court, which would be a death penalty offense. Kares, we've talked about at other times. What is it exactly? The sages debate that, but it's some kind of shortening of life due to a very severe sin that goes unatoned, right? So my consecrated is, so if so, just as the act of slaughtering my, meaning God's, consecrated animals in your place is punishable by kares, so too the act of slaughtering your non-sacred animals in my place in the temple should be punishable by kares. So to counter this logic, the verse states, if a man from the house of Israel slaughters an ox or lamb and has not brought it to the door of the tent of meeting to sacrifice an offering to the Lord, and that man shall be cut off. This cut off is like kares. So this teaches that it is only for an offering that one slaughtered outside the tent of meeting of the tabernacle, right, which is what we had when we were wandering the desert, and later this was replaced by the temple. So it is only when he slaughters the sacred outside the tabernacle or outside the temple that he is punishable with kares. But for non-sacred animals that one slaughtered inside the temple courtyard, he is not punished with kares. The Gemara asks, in light of the above distinction in law between these two cases in terms of the consequence, well, perhaps the entire comparison can be refuted. Meaning, well, if you're going to say that the punishment is not the same because the two deeds are different, the Torah distinguishes between them, well, then maybe we shouldn't say that non-sacred animals slaughtered inside the temple become prohibited in the same way that sacred animals slaughtered outside the temple become prohibited. If the consequence to the one doing it is kares in the one case but not kares in the other, why should the meat become prohibited in the same way, right? What is an aspect unique to slaughtering your non-sacred animals in my place? It is that it is punishable by kares and is therefore a severe prohibition, which could explain the law that one is prohibited from deriving any benefit from these sacred animals that were slaughtered outside the temple. The prohibition against slaughtering a non-sacred animal in the temple courtyard is not punishable by kares. So therefore, it could be regarded as a less severe prohibition. Perhaps in this case, it is permitted to derive benefit from the slaughtered animal. Therefore, the law that one is prohibited from deriving benefit from a non-sacred animal that was slaughtered in the temple courtyard still does not have a source. We don't have a proof that that is the law. So Abaye is going to quote a lengthy baraisa. Right, we're not going to understand the proof right away. First, he's going to quote the whole baraisa, and then we're going to understand how it becomes a proof for this law that non-sacred animals slaughtered in the temple courtyard become prohibited for all kinds of benefit, including betrothal. So, what is the baraisa? Abaye said, the Torah states 3 verses that have a superfluous element with regard to the various species from which one may bring a peace offering. The verse, quote, and he slaughters it, Leviticus 3:2. The verse, and he shall slaughter it, Leviticus 3:8. And the verse, and he shall slaughter it, at Leviticus 3:13. Now the Torah could simply have stated, and he shall slaughter, without saying it, right? The it is added in all 3 instances. So why must the verse state the term it in these 3 instances? And so the Baraisa continues. The source for the law is because it is stated with regard to the ritual slaughter, right, kosher slaughter, of animals for meat consumption. Quote, if the place which the Lord your God shall choose to put his name there be too far from you, then you shall slaughter of your herd and of your flock. Deuteronomy 12:21, from which it is derived. When you are far from the place, meaning far away from the temple, you may slaughter non-sacred animals for meat consumption, but you may not slaughter non-sacred animals in a near place, i.e. in the temple. So the verse serves to exclude non-sacred animals, and it thereby teaches that they may not be slaughtered in the temple courtyard. So the Baraisa continues, and I have derived the prohibition against slaughtering a non-sacred animal in the temple courtyard only with regard to unblemished animals, which are fit to be sacrificed. From where do I know to include even blemished animals, which are not fit to be sacrificed in this prohibition? I include blemished animals since they are at least of the type that is fit to be sacrificed. Now, from where do I know to include the undomesticated animal, which is never sacrificed as an offering? Right? A deer is a kosher animal. You can't hunt it, right? You can't shoot it with a bullet or a bow and arrow and eat it, because then you would not have slaughtered it in a kosher manner. But if a deer was slaughtered in a kosher manner, it would be kosher meat that you could eat. But a deer can never be brought as an offering to the temple, because offerings, peace offerings, burnt offerings, sin offerings, thanks offerings, etc., are only brought from domesticated animals. From where do I know? From where do I know to include the undomesticated animal, which is never sacrificed as an offering, in this prohibition of slaughtering it in the temple courtyard? I include the undomesticated animal since it is rendered fit for consumption by means of slaughtering, like a domesticated animal. From where do I know to include fowl, F-O-W-L, poultry, as the Torah does not mention slaughter with regard to fowl in this prohibition? No, the verse states, and he slaughters it, and he shall slaughter it, as well as, and he shall slaughter it, employing the additional term it all 3 times. And these 3 verses teach that one may not slaughter any non-sacred animal in the temple courtyard, whether domesticated or undomesticated, whether fowl or mammal, and whether blemished or unblemished. If it's not sacred, you don't slaughter it in the temple courtyard. Now, the Baraisa continues. One might have thought that one may not slaughter ab initio, but if he did slaughter, it would be permitted for him to eat it. Right? Okay, we get you're not allowed to do it. But if you did do it, does that really mean it's prohibited? How do we know that? Therefore, the verse states, if the place which the Lord your God shall choose to put his name there be too far from you, then you shall slaughter of your herd and of your flock, which the Lord has given you, as I have commanded you, and you shall eat within your gates after all the desire of your soul, which is expounded as follows: that which you slaughter in a far place outside the temple, you may eat. But you may not eat that which you slaughter in a near place, which excludes non-sacred animals that were slaughtered in the temple courtyard. Therefore, it is prohibited to eat a non-sacred animal slaughtered in the temple courtyard even after the fact. And the Baraisa continues, and I have derived only that the prohibition against eating the meat after the fact applies to unblemished animals. Now we're on 58a, which are fit to be sacrificed. From where do I know to include blemished animals in this prohibition? I include blemished animals since they are at least of the type that is fit to be sacrificed. And from where do I know to include the undomesticated animal in the prohibition? I include the undomesticated animal since it is rendered fit for consumption by means of slaughtering, like a domesticated animal. And from where do I know to include birds? As the Torah does not mention slaughter with regard to birds in this prohibition, the verse states, and he slaughters it, and he shall slaughter it, and he shall slaughter it, employing the additional term it all 3 times. And that's how I know to include blemished or unblemished, domesticated or undomesticated, bird or mammal in the prohibition, that you can't slaughter it in the temple courtyard. And if you did slaughter it, you cannot eat it, you cannot benefit from it in any way. The Baraisa continues, one might have thought that he may not slaughter a non-sacred animal in the temple courtyard ab initio, but if he did slaughter it, he may cast it before the dogs, i.e. have benefit from it, right? We've derived that you can't do it. We've derived that if you do it, you can't eat it. And now they're going to prove that if you did it, which was a violation of a prohibition, you can't eat it, and you can't even feed it to your dog, right? Because if you use some kind of meat to feed your dog, well, then you don't have to give your dog other dog food, right? So that's a benefit to you. So how do you know? The verse states, therefore you shall not eat any flesh that is torn of beasts in the field. You shall cast it to the dogs, right? That's a nevela, right? An unslaughtered carcass, you can't eat it, but you can feed it to your dog, which teaches that although one is prohibited from eating the meat of a treifa, one may derive benefit from it. And the word it serves to emphasize and exclude. You may cast it, i.e. a treifa or a nevela, to the dogs, but you may not cast non-sacred animals that have been slaughtered in the temple courtyard to your dogs, because it is prohibited to derive any benefit from them. The Gemara relates, Mar Yehuda found Rav Yosef and Rav Shmuel, the son of Rabbah bar Chana, standing at the entrance of Rabbah's study hall. And he said to them, it is taught in a Baraisa with regard to one who betroths a woman with a firstborn donkey, with meat cooked in milk, or with non-sacred animals slaughtered in the temple courtyard. Rabbi Shimon says she is betrothed. And the rabbis say, meaning the majority who overrule Rabbi Shimon, she is not betrothed, which is the law. Now, apparently, according to Rabbi Shimon, the minority opinion, the prohibition against deriving benefit from non-sacred animals slaughtered in the temple courtyard is not by Torah law, which is why the betrothal takes effect. And Mar Yehuda raises a contradiction. Well, maybe your minority opinion is not, you don't understand it correctly, right? If you're saying that Rabbi Shimon in the minority here says it would be a betrothal, but this contradicts Rabbi Shimon in another place. Rabbi Shimon says, non-sacred, domesticated animals slaughtered in the temple courtyard must be burned, as well as non-sacred, undomesticated animal slaughtered in the temple courtyard. Right. A non-sacred, domesticated animal that was slaughtered in the temple courtyard must be burned, just as a non-sacred, undomesticated animal slaughtered in the temple courtyard must be burned. Meaning, if it must be burned, you're not going to derive benefit from it. Now, this indicates that it is prohibited to derive benefit from them. And the other sages were silent. They had no answer. They came before Rabbah. They're saying, well, we thought that Rabbi Shimon said you could benefit from it, but this seems to indicate you can't. They were confused. So they came before Rabbah and they told him about this difficulty. And he said to them, a quarrelsome person has put you up to asking this question. With what are we dealing here in the first Baraisa? We are dealing with a case where it was slaughtered and found to be a treifa. And Rabbi Shimon conforms to his standard line of reasoning that an act of slaughter, which does not render the animal permitted to be eaten, is not called slaughter. So the animal does not have the status of a non-sacred animal slaughtered in the temple courtyard. Isn't that interesting? We've been talking about if you take a non-sacred animal and slaughter it in the temple courtyard. But if after you slaughtered it, it was found to be a treifa, meaning, for example, it had a punctured lung and it would have died anyway within a certain amount of time. That's what makes it a treifa. And that's what means that even though you performed the action of kosher slaughter on that animal, because it turned out to be a treifa, that animal was considered walking dead already, and the slaughter was not a kosher slaughter. It was not an action at all. Was not an action at all. So it doesn't come into the realm of the law that we're talking about here, that a non-sacred animal slaughtered in the temple courtyard becomes prohibited for benefit, because this animal was not deemed to be slaughtered at all. It's like it was walked into the temple courtyard and then taken out, because it was already dead before it entered. As it is taught in a Baraisa in Tosefta of Chulin 2:4, with regard to one who slaughters a known treifa, as well as one who slaughters an animal, and it was found afterward to be a treifa, and this and that were non-sacred animals slaughtered in the temple courtyard, Rabbi Shimon permits one to derive benefit from them, as explained previously, because it's not slaughter. And the rabbis prohibit one from deriving benefit from them, since they do not distinguish between an act of slaughter that does render the animal permitted to be eaten and one that does not. It is only in a case where the man betrothed her with a treifa that was slaughtered in the temple courtyard that Rabbi Shimon says she is betrothed, but not when the animal was not a treifa. Now, the Mishnah teaches. Now, this was the confusing aspect of Mishnah number 10 that I've been waiting to get back to. Right? The Mishnah said that all these prohibited items, orla, right, fruit from a tree in its first 3 years, kilayim, grain and grapes that were grown in the same vineyard, this meat, let's say of an ox that was sentenced to be stoned, or of a non-sacred animal that was slaughtered in the temple courtyard. All of these are prohibited for benefit. Right? A person cannot have any benefit from these prohibited items. And so if he attempted to betroth a woman with them, she is not betrothed. Then the Mishnah said, but if he took this prohibited item and sold it and got money, he definitely benefited from the prohibited item, right? You are not permitted to benefit from those prohibited items, and he did. So he committed a transgression when he sold the orla or the kilayim or the meat of the ox that was sentenced to be stoned, etc. But then, so he's liable to bring an offering, a sin offering, make atonement, pay a penalty, whatever else he has to do, because he derived benefit from a prohibited item. But now he's got that money. He sold the orla and he's got money in his hand. And then he betroths this woman with that money. And the Mishnah said she is betrothed. So if he's prohibited to derive benefit from those items, and he did derive benefit, and now he got money for the benefit, how is it possible that he can use that money to betroth a woman? And the betrothal is a valid betrothal. Why is that? At last, the Gemara will explain. The Mishnah teaches that if a person sold any of the items from which one is prohibited to derive benefit, and he betrothed the woman with the money received from their sale, she is betrothed. With regard to the possibility of deriving benefit from money received in exchange for items from which benefit is forbidden, the Gemara asks, from where do we derive that this is permitted? Logic tells us it should not be permitted. How can this be permitted? Where do we learn this? And the Gemara answers, it is from the fact that the merciful one reveals in the Torah with regard to an object of idolatry, right? An idol. Avodah zarah is how we say idolatry in Hebrew. We know that avodah zarah, idolatry, is one of the biggest sins that there is. There are 3 sins that a Jew, if he said, commit this sin or die, he has to allow himself to die, or at least it's permitted. He has to die rather than commit murder. He has to die rather than commit rape. And since it's classified in the same way, he has to die, though some would say he's permitted to die. He's not forced to, because we understand how difficult this would be. If somebody says, bow to the idol or I'm going to kill you, right? You should not bow to the idol. You should not bow to the idol. Now, there's definitely, it's not treated the same up and down the line as murder and rape, okay? But the point is that idolatry is at that level. Okay, so the Merciful One says in his Torah, what? He says, if you bow to an idol, or any idol that is used for idolatry, even if you don't bow to it, but it is an object of idolatry, right? Idolaters bow to it. They worship this idol that they made with their hands. That object, can a Jew take any benefit from it? No way, right? So if, for example, I don't know if there's any like statute of limitations on this offhand, but let's say you're traveling and somebody very friendly says to you, "Oh, here, take this statue as a souvenir of this trip. Means a lot to us. We want you to have it." You get home and then you realize it wasn't just a souvenir; it's an idol that the people in that other land or that other place worship, and you're like, "Oh, I can't keep that." So you say, well, I'm not just going to throw it out, I'll sell it. No, you cannot do that. You cannot benefit from idolatry in any way. Now, listen closely. The Torah said, with respect to an object that was the subject of idolatry, quote, and you shall be banned, B-A-N-N-E-D, banned, like it, Deuteronomy 7:26, which teaches that anything that you cause to come from it, i.e. in exchange for it, is like it. In other words, if you sell an idol, the money that you get for it is equally prohibited like the idol was. It's prohibited. That's why you can't sell it, right? Now, this doesn't sound like, well, wait a minute, this is what we've been talking about, right? That if it's prohibited to benefit from Orla, and then you sell it, so then doesn't the money become prohibited? Just like if you sell an idol, then the money is prohibited. And therefore, if you sell an idol, the money that you get from it, it's prohibited to you. You cannot betroth a woman with it. But we just said that with the case of Orla, this fruit from a tree in its first 3 years, which is prohibited to benefit from it, you can't eat it, you can't sell it. But if you do sell it, then you get money. That money could be used for betrothal. So what's the difference between the proceeds of selling Orla versus the proceeds of selling an idol? Answer. You will be, which indicates that anything that you cause to come from it, the idol, like in exchange from it, is like it. So the money is prohibited like the idol is. And it can be understood by inference that with regard to all the other prohibitions of the Torah, monies received for items from which benefit is forbidden are permitted, right? It's not like you are off the hook for selling Orla. You committed a transgression, you're going to be accountable for it. But the money that you get in exchange for it, that money, you can use it for things. Whereas if you sell an idol, that money is as prohibited to you as the idol was. And that is to bring home the lesson of what a big sin idolatry is and how important it is for all Jews. I'm not going to comment on other religions, other monotheistic religions. I don't know the rules of other monotheistic religions. But that's how important it is for Jews to distance themselves from objects of idolatry. Where does this come up? I'll just mention, there's a lot of yoga classrooms where there's, a statue of gods of other religions. That's an object of idolatry, and you're not supposed to be in a room with that. You're not supposed to look at it. You're not supposed to get any benefit from it, and you're not supposed to, pay people money for your yoga class that you're taking in a room that includes that. The Gemara suggests, but let us derive a general principle concerning other prohibitions from the case of idolatry. The Gemara answers, the derivation is not applied. right? So why don't we say that if you can't benefit from the proceeds of selling an idol, why don't we extend that principle to all the other things that are prohibited to derive benefit from it? And you shouldn't be able to use the money that you got, by transgressing the law against benefiting from warlaw. So therefore, you shouldn't be able to use that money to create betrothal. Why is it that only in the case of idolatry? And the answer is because idolatry is a special case. And there's only one other law in the Torah that is similar to it in this way, that the proceeds are as prohibited as the prohibited item. And that is the produce of the sabbatical year. Right? We don't extend this principle that the proceeds of selling something of idolatry is prohibited. Why? Because the derivation is not applied. Because an object of idol worship and produce of the sabbatical year are two verses that come as one, i.e. to teach the same matter. And since both prohibitions also extend to the money obtained for them, and any two verses that come as one do not teach their common aspect to apply to other cases. And the Gemara clarifies, the source indicating that this is true of an object of idol worship is what we said. What is the source indicating that the law applies to produce of the sabbatical year? And the verse states, it is a jubilee. It shall be holy to you, from which it is derived, just as consecrated property transfers its sanctity to the money with which it is redeemed, so too, produce of the sabbatical year, which has the same status as the jubilee year, transfers its sanctity to the money with which it is redeemed. Consequently, money used to acquire the produce of the sabbatical year will be subject to the same laws as the produce itself. If so, one could also say that just as with consecrated property, it transfers its sanctity to the money with which it is redeemed and becomes desacralized, so too produce of the sabbatical year should transfer its sanctity to the money with which it is redeemed, and then it should become desacralized. Nevertheless, the verse states, shall be, meaning as it is, so it shall be, indicating that the sabbatical year produce does not become desacralized. Right, sabbatical year produce. You can't plant when the temple's standing, etc. We're observing the Shemitah year. Every 7 years, the farmers don't plant. This nation is at such a high spiritual level that in the 6th year, there's so much bounty, there's plenty to eat for the following year. So we don't plant. You can eat food from the field. It's not like God is telling you to starve. Far from it. But that food that you can pick from the field for your own use, you can't sell it. You can't buy it. Right? You can just take it for your use. And if you do sell it, you have violated prohibition. The food that you sold, produce of the sabbatical year, remains produce of the sabbatical year that can't be bought or sold. The money that you got also becomes sanctified in the sense that it is prohibited for your use. You can't do anything with that money. The Gemara explains how so. If one purchased meat with produce of the sabbatical year, both these and those, i.e. the meat and the produce, are disposed of in the sabbatical year. You can't, take the extra that you gathered in the sabbatical year and keep it for yourself in the following year. The sanctity of the sabbatical year takes effect with regard to the meat that you exchange sabbatical year produce for as well. It is treated like the produce and must be disposed of when the obligation to dispose of the sabbatical year produce goes into effect. If he then purchases fish with this meat, then the meat loses its consecrated status and the fish takes on the consecrated state. If you then purchase wine with these fish, the fish lose their consecrated status and the wine, like the items in between, get desacralized, but the original produce stays sacred and the final item remains sacred. And the Gemara asks, this works out well according to the one who says that any two verses that come as one do not teach their common aspect to apply to other cases. But according to the one who says that they do teach their common aspect to apply to other cases, what can be said? Why is it not learned from these examples that money received from the sale of an item from which benefit is forbidden is likewise forbidden? And the Gemara answers, the expressions of restriction are written in both cases. Here, with regard to idol worship, it is written, for it is banned. Deuteronomy 7:26, which indicates only that it is banned. I.e., it has its prohibition extend to money received from its sale, while other prohibited items are not. And there, with regard to the produce of the sabbatical year, it is written, it is a jubilee, which teaches that with regard to it, yes, the halacha applies, but this law does not apply to anything else. And that concludes our discussion of Mishnah number 10. Mishnah 11, the final Mishnah here in chapter 2. Short Mishnah, relatively short Gemara. Mishnah 11. With regard to one who betroths a woman with terumos, right? The first 2% of the produce that goes to the priest. Or with tithes, right? The next 10% that goes to the Levite. Or the next 10% after that, which is Ma'aser Sheni, which you're supposed to use to go to Jerusalem for the festival. Or if he tries to betroth her with the foreleg, the cheeks and stomach of an animal, which are normally given as gifts to priests. Or with the water of purification, right? When the temple was standing and there was a red heifer every few centuries, and they would, slaughter and burn the red heifer, collect its ashes, and then the ashes of the red heifer would be mixed with the waters of sprinkling, or with pure water, and they would become the waters of sprinkling that were used to purify a person who had come into contact with a corpse, so that he could enter the temple and bring his offering, right? If there's no waters of sprinkling, then anyone who has come into contact with the dead or walked through a cemetery, etc., cannot bring an offering, cannot enter the temple. Very important. So, since these are all holy things, terumos, tithes, Ma'aser Sheni, second tithe, the water of purification itself, or even the ashes of purification themselves, which were mixed with the water sprinkled on an impure person, during the purification, right, for impurity imparted by a corpse. In all of these cases, what do you think? If you use teruma or tithe or the waters of sprinkling that you somehow came into your possession and you wanted to use that as the item of value to betroth a woman, is she betrothed? You would think, after all that we've read about using items that have a very sacred purpose, that we can't use them to create betrothal, you would think she is not betrothed. And we would be wrong. She is betrothed. And this is so even if the man betrothing her is an Israelite and not a priest or a Levite. He's not even allowed to touch these things. What's going on? The Gemara, Ula says, the benefit of discretion, toivas chana, right? The benefit of discretion. The benefit of discretion doesn't mean what it sounds like in English. In English, it sounds like it's very beneficial to keep your mouth shut. Keep secrets to yourself. Don't be critical. Don't say stupid stuff that's going to get you in trouble. Be discreet. That's not the benefit of discretion. The benefit of discretion means that a Yisrael, an Israelite, who is a farmer and has produce, and he has to give the first 2% to a priest. Which priest is he going to give it to? It's up to him. He can choose which priest. He has a priest that lives in the neighborhood. He likes him. He can give it to him. He doesn't like the priest who lives in the neighborhood. He likes a priest who lives in Jerusalem, so he can bring it with him and give it to the priest in Jerusalem. There are two brothers who are living in the neighborhood, and one brother he likes and the other brother he doesn't. So he gives his teruma to one of the brothers and not the other. He can do that. That's the benefit of discretion, that he can choose who to give it to. He can't consume that teruma himself, but he can choose which priest to give it to. His meiser, the first tithe, has to be given to a Levite. Which Levite? The Yisrael can choose which Levite. It's up to him. He can decide which Levite to give it to. This is the benefit of discretion. Says Ula, the benefit of discretion, right? It's a benefit in the sense that when you choose one priest over another, that priest is going to tend to like you, and it's going to, you're going to have a better relationship with that priest. Maybe that priest is a big businessman, and because you gave your teruma to him, he's going to be more likely to do business with you, right? It could end up, bringing you financial gain. But says Ula, the benefit of discretion in itself does not have monetary value. It might lead to financial gain. It might lead to enhanced relationships. It might lead to that priest wanting to betroth his daughter to your son. Nevertheless, we don't say that the benefit of discretion has monetary value, probably because we can't measure the monetary value. At any rate, Ula says it does not have monetary value. Rabbi Abba raised an objection to Ula from the Mishnah with regard to one who betroths a woman with terumos or with tithes or with gifts, with the water purification, with the ashes of the red heifer. She is betrothed. And this is so, even if the man betrothing her is an Israelite, a Yisrael. This indicates that although an Israelite cannot consume the priestly gifts himself because he's not a priest, he may nevertheless betroth a woman with them, since he possesses the option to give them to the priest or a Levite of his choice. And it would seem that that benefit of choosing which priest or Levite to give it to, that it does have monetary value, and it is that value that he uses to betroth a woman, who can then give those gifts to a priest or a Levite, right? You've transferred that benefit to her. Now that you've given her the teruma, she can't eat it either, but she can choose which priest to give it to. So it seems like you've transferred the benefit of discretion to her, and that's why the betrothal works, right? Would seem not. Ula says, you misunderstood the Mishnah. Since here the case is with an Israelite, right, a Yisrael, an Israelite man, who came into possession of untithed produce as an inheritance from the household of his mother's father, who was a priest, right? His mother's father was a priest, but his mother's not a priest, and he's not a priest, but his grandfather was a priest. His grandfather died, he inherited what belonged to his grandfather. So there was untithed produce that belonged to his grandfather, okay. And the Tana of the Mishnah holds that gifts that have not been separated are considered as though they have been separated. The untithed produce is not viewed as one entity, but rather is viewed as a mixture of regular produce, teruma, and tithes. This teruma belonged to his grandfather, who was a priest. Since he has inherited this teruma, he has ownership rights to it in addition to the benefit of discretion. While he cannot consume this produce because he is an Israelite, he can sell it to a priest and keep the money. Since it has actual value, it can be used to betroth a woman, right? It's very interesting, right? Teruma that belonged to his grandfather, right? His grandfather could consume or could sell. When his grandson inherits it, since his grandson, the son of the priest's daughter, is not himself, the grandson is not a priest, so he can't consume it, but he can sell it. He doesn't have to give it away to a priest. He can sell it. It has monetary value to the grandson who inherits teruma from his grandfather, the priest. And that's what he's using to betroth the woman, not the monetary value of the benefit of discretion, which according to Ula, benefit of discretion does not have monetary value. With regard to this issue, Rabbi Chia bar Avin inquired of Rav Huna, does the benefit of discretion have monetary value or does it not have monetary value? Rav Huna said to him, you learned it in the Mishnah with regard to one who betroths a woman with terumos or with tithes or with gifts or with the water purification, with the ashes of the red heifer, she is betrothed. And this is so even if the man betrothing her is an Israelite. And this indicates that the benefit of discretion has monetary value, contrary to the opinion of Ula. Rabbi Chia bar Avin said to him, but didn't we establish it in accordance with the opinion of Ula, as referring to an Israelite who came into possession of untithed produce as an inheritance from the household of his grandfather who was a priest? Rav Huna said to him, you are out. Hotzah. Rabbi Chia bar Avin was embarrassed as he thought that Rav Huna was telling him he was out, meaning that he was wrong due to the law that he had stated. Sensing that Rabbi Chia bar Avin was embarrassed, Rav Huna said to him, this is what I meant to say. You are a hutzlah, as Rav Asi from the town of Huzal stands in accordance with your opinion. You're on the side of people who say the law is according to Ula. I'm not, but in the end, the people who hold according to Ula got it right, and that is the law. It is according to Ula. The Gemara suggests, let us say that this dispute is parallel to a dispute between other Tanaim. The Baraisa in Meiser Sheni taught, one who steals another person's untithed produce pays him the full value of that untithed produce. This is the statement of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. Rabbi Yosei, the son of Rabbi Yehuda, says he pays only the value of the non-sacred produce that it contains. And what? Is it not the case that they disagree about this issue? That one sage, Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, holds that the benefit of discretion has monetary value, so he must be compensated beyond the value of the non-sacred produce. And the other sage, Rabbi Yossi, the son of Rabbi Yehuda, holds that the benefit of discretion does not have monetary value, and therefore only the non-sacred produce is of value to the owner, and that's what needs to be replaced. But the Gemara rejects this analysis. No, everyone agrees that the benefit of discretion does not have monetary value, per the opinion of Ula. And here the case is with an Israelite who came into possession of untithed produce as an inheritance from the household of his mother's father, who was a priest. And they disagree with regard to the question of whether or not gifts that have not been separated are considered as though they have been separated. One sage, Rebbe, holds that they are considered as though they have been separated, which means that the grandson inherited the teruma itself from his grandfather, so the thief must repay him the value of the teruma and the tithes as well. And the other sage, Rabbi Yossi, the son of Rabbi Yehuda, holds that such gifts are not considered as though they have been separated, and the produce is viewed as regular untithed produce, where the Israelite has only the benefit of discretion, which is of no monetary value. And if you wish, say instead that everyone agrees that gifts are considered as though they have been separated and that the benefit of discretion does not have monetary value. The case is not referring to an Israelite who came into possession of untithed produce as an inheritance from the household of his mother's father. Rather, it is concerning regular, untithed produce. And here they disagree with regard to a statement of Shmuel. What did Shmuel say? He said, by Torah law, even 1 grain given as teruma exempts the entire heap, since the Torah does not specify a minimum amount for teruma. By rabbinic law, you have to give 2%, although it's actually anywhere between, between 1/40th and 1/60th, right? Normal amount is 1/50th. Right, so where am I? And one sage, Rebbe, is of the opinion that the ruling is in accordance with the opinion of Shmuel. So the thief must pay the value of the untithed produce as well, since the owner can say that he would separate a single grain as teruma for the entire heap, and the rest would remain non-sacred produce. And the other sage, Rabbi Yossi, the son of Rabbi Yehuda, is of the opinion that the ruling is not in accordance with the opinion of Shmuel, which means that when the owner makes his claim, he must subtract at least 1/60th of the total amount as teruma. And if you wish, say instead that everyone is of the opinion that the ruling is not in accordance with the opinion of Shmuel. And here, this is the reasoning of Rebbe. Although the benefit of discretion does not have monetary value, and by right should not lead to reimbursement, the sages penalized the thief. If he did not need to pay for the teruma contained in the produce, he would have been able to keep it, as no priest has the legal ability to demand that the teruma be given specifically to him. That's a corollary of the benefit of discretion. And if you wish, say instead that everyone is of the opinion that the ruling is in accordance with the opinion of Shmuel, and here this is the reasoning of Rabbi Yossi, the son of Rabbi Yehuda. The sages penalize the owner, since he should not have left his untithed produce in that state of being untithed, and he should have separated teruma without delay. Now we learned in the Mishna, with regard to one who betroths a woman with terumas, or with tithes, or with the gifts to the priest, or with the water of purification, with the ashes of the red heifer, in all these cases she is betrothed, and this is so even if the man betrothing her is an Israelite, and as opposed to a priest or a Levite. And the Gemara raises a contradiction to this from the following Baraisa. I'm very close to done. Questions or comments, please get them in now. With regard to one who accepts payment to judge, his judgments are nullified. It's very interesting. Basically what the Gemara is going to say here is a judge cannot get paid for serving as a judge. Now, this is in a rabbinic court. They are going to say that if he is taking time away from earning a living in order to work as a judge, he can be compensated for the amount of money he didn't make while he was judging, right? So it's not that you can't get paid for your time, right? But they did not have professional judges in the same way that, a Supreme Court justice in America has a salary. There's nothing wrong with that. But what we're paying a judge in a rabbinic court for is just loss of wages that he could have been making. And this means that, if he was like a wealthy man, he can get more than if he was a poor man, who's putting aside a low-paying job versus a high-paying job in order to come and serve as a judge. But what we want is that judges are completely impartial and not even a hint of corruption. And that's why it says that with regard to one who accepts payment to judge, we're not even saying accept payment to give a verdict to one side, total corruption, but we're even saying that one cannot be paid to judge. And if one is paid to judge, his judgments are nullified. So similarly, with regard to one who accepts payment to testify, his testimony is nullified. Interesting, right? We know that we don't pay eyewitnesses to come to court and give their testimony. We have expert witnesses who do get paid, but not in a rabbinic court. With regard to one who accepts payment to sprinkle the purification water on one who was impure from impurity imparted by a corpse, or to sanctify the purification water by placing the ashes of the red heifer in them. His water is considered cave water, which is generally foul, and his ashes are burnt ashes. Using these items to betroth a woman is analogous to being paid for them. So they should be considered as having no monetary value, and the betrothal should not take effect. A little bit similar to the idea that, a rabbi, a professional rabbi, right, who has to be there every Shabbos and give a Devar Torah, give a teaching, give a sermon, you might think that he's getting paid for serving as the rabbi on Shabbos. Yeah, he's not. He can't get paid for serving on Shabbos. But a rabbi can get a salary, can't he? Of course. What does he get a salary for? All the preparation he does during the week so that he can give his teaching on Shabbos. Not the same principle at all, but you can see how it's related. So, since a judge can't get paid to judge and a witness can't get paid to testify, and somebody sprinkling the water cannot get paid to sprinkle, and one who collects ashes cannot get paid to do that, right? Because in all these cases, it's a privilege to do that. So then the water sprinkling by one who's paid to do it would not be valid sprinkling water and ashes, etc. So you would think that how could you then use these ashes or water of sprinkling to create betrothal? How could that work? Abaye said, no, this is not difficult. Since here the Mishna is referring to one who betroths a woman with the value of the payment for bringing and filling the vessel with the purification waters. For that, one is permitted to accept payment, right? You don't have to work for free during the menial labor that's not on Shabbos that is involved in making the sprinkling possible. You can get paid for that, just like you can get paid for preparing to give the Devar Torah on Shabbos. Performing this act for the woman is comparable to giving her an item of value, since she will not have to pay someone to bring the vessel for her. There, the Baraisa is dealing with one who accepts payment for sprinkling or sanctifying the water. This is referring to payment for the actual sprinkling and sanctifying. And the Gemara comments, according to this answer, the language of the Mishnah makes sense because it is precise, as it teaches here in the Mishnah that she is betrothed with the water of purification or with the ashes of purification. Is that the same? The ashes of purification are in the water purification. But no, they're mentioned separately, which indicates that the water and ashes have not yet been mixed together. And it teaches there in the Baraisa to sprinkle or to sanctify, indicating that he receives payment for the actual sprinkling and sanctification. And the Gemara affirms, learn from it, that this is the correct explanation of the Mishnah and the Baraisa. And with that, we conclude chapter 2 here in Tractate Kiddushin. Tomorrow, Friday, at the regular time, noon Pacific, we'll continue with chapter 3. Quick question, Bill. Presumably the phrase domesticated, when we're talking about domesticated animals that can be used as offerings in the temple, but not non-domesticated animals, says Bill, presumably the phrase domesticated in this context means those animals that were commonly domesticated at the time of the Torah's giving. So even if we, at some point between now and the building of the third temple, domesticate a species of deer, it still won't be brought up, at least as if I've understood the law right. It's a great question. I think you have understood the law right. And that liminal animal that comes up in many discussions like this is the koi, and we're not quite sure what the koi was, but that's the one where the sages were unsure if it was a domesticated animal or an undomesticated animal. And there was no talk, well, it became a domesticated animal later, so that's good enough. No, right? So I think you've understood it correctly, but I'm not a rabbi and I'm not sure. Joseph, is treif just that the animal died via punctured lung or that was slaughtered in an unkosher manner? Slaughtered in an unkosher manner makes it a nevela, an unslaughtered animal. Treifa means not that it was slaughtered in an unkosher manner, but rather that there was something wrong with it. And so it would have died anyway. So that even if you did slaughter it in a kosher manner, it is not rendered permitted for eating because it had this inherent deficiency inside. And the problem with the treifa is usually we don't know it was a treifa until after we slaughtered it. Right? So it's a domesticated animal, it's a kosher animal. We have no reason to believe that it was consecrated or prohibited in some other reason. We slaughter it. Kosher slaughter, proper slaughter. Now the butcher comes and he starts to take apart the animal and he examines the lungs. If they discover that there was like a needle in the lung, the animal, would have died from that wound later, or it possibly would have died from it later. It is now rendered unkosher because it's a treifa. You can, like an avela, give it to the dog, but you cannot eat it. And Joseph also says, I've been wondering about yoga. If there's no idol, is it still okay to practice in a modern yoga class? Are the poses considered idolatry because it comes from a Hindu practice? I would be curious what Jews in India have poskin. That's a great question. I don't know the answer to that. Let's put it this way. I've seen religious Jews in a yoga class. That definitely there was no like Hindu being spoken. There was no music being played. There was no meditation that talked about sort of idolatrous practice. It was just poses being done. That doesn't mean that you're wrong. I don't know. I don't know. It's my impression that just doing the poses for the sake of the exercise, even the mental and spiritual benefits of doing the poses is not in itself idolatry. But I haven't done yoga in a long time. I'm more religious now than I was when I did it. So I'm not sure. And this requires further inquiry. That's what I've got for you today. But definitely, like if there's a Buddha or a Krishna, I shouldn't even say those names, but if there's that kind of a statue in the room, you can't do yoga there. That's what I've got for us today. With God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow, Friday at noon Pacific, to open chapter 3.